Welcome back to Climate Change Perspectives. Before the break, we were talking on the new policy that has been approved by Cabinet. And Minister, let's just take it a step further. When we look at policy that is created in South Africa and globally as well, especially when it comes to such controversial issues such as climate change, policy is not really the problem. It always lands up being about implementation. Can we get it right in South Africa? And what would you say the biggest loophole right now is with the current policy when it comes to implementation? Is there one, and can you overcome it?
Well, I think it is actually true that here in South Africa and elsewhere, there's been quite a disappointing approach when we come to implementation of very good policies. Within the South African context, let me just pick on one example, for instance, the destabilizing factors, which are potentially still there, by the way. The first one is climate change. Within the climate change policy response as it is now, is that we do say that for us to do all this work, we need a carbon budget, which must be formulated 2 years after publication of this policy. Will we have that budget? I mean, right now, throughout the world, everybody's talking about the world financial crisis. We may, come into crunches, the number crunches. Finance may not quite have that amount. That's a threat identified. Secondly, the threat is if departments of government do not act together, even if there is a monitoring and evaluation unit on department in the presidency. If they decide to work in silos, we obviously have to, it will take us time, but that time that it takes you actually draws you back. If you, just recollect ourselves and get people to work together, it takes time. That's one threat. Third threat is capacity, especially within the space of local government. That's a very, for me, very, very serious one. Most of the policies that we have not been able to actually move on to implement effectively, the problem has been capacity. For instance, just a step backward, in our air pollution act that we've formulated, with strategy and all, we didn't quite have to date, actually. We didn't have specialists at local government level, and yet air pollution, in terms of the law, has got to be implemented and monitored at local government level. You see, there's a mismatch of policy and implementers of policy. So those are some of the threats. We've got to work on them, though.
You spoke of budgets. What kind of a number have you put to your current white paper?
It's going to be a big budget. We haven't yet put it, especially because there are some aspects of that policy which we still need to finalize. We want to consult as adequate as possible. When I talk about aspects of that policy, once they are finalized, we'll be able to know what's the carbon budget exactly. But those aspects are, for instance, what do we say to sectors? We believe that going forward, there's going to be a time and stage where we say, you health, your percentage is 5%. You energy, your percentage is 67% cuts that we want from you. You whoever, and so on, transport. So the budgets have got to go along and come along. There is already budget right now as we speak. I mean, the fact that energy can get into alternative energy and that program, IDC has set aside some money. Within the Department of Economic Development, there's money set aside. So that's carbon budget within the green economy. Transition into green economy, there are already funds available. And those are the funds that we've got to use. I can't say what's the exact budget right now, but yes, indeed, there is going to be that budget.
I think you've alluded to very important points. I think when we talked about the issue of policy and the implementation, which you recognize, and now the issue of capacity, which affects a lot of other sectors. My concern, or our concern, and those that have published works, is that it's the poor that will suffer the most as a consequence of climate change. But notwithstanding that there are activities and there are initiatives to put the requisite resources around it. But if capacity at local government to ensure that that money is spent properly in order to benefit the poor, who are going to be the principal victims of climate change, in your engagement with your counterparts across Africa in trying to form a position for COP17, which you'll head the South African delegation, how do you see, is there just an acceptance, or is there a realization that if we don't do something, it's probably getting later every day?
I think let me start by just acknowledging that within the African continent, at the level of negotiators, at the level of our governments, especially where we talk about climate change, talking to ministers, especially ministers of environment, there is common agreement that indeed we are just behind time. The time for action is actually yesterday. And on that note, we really are very unanimous in saying that, yes, the African continent in particular is the one that's going to be affected. You can imagine if situations like what's happening in Somalia continues to happen, there's drought, there's no food production, and so on. Food security will be in danger if it doesn't rain or the rain falls, different patterns that we're not actually used to on the continent. The food basket is in danger. And having recognized that, we said it is necessary that we really push hard to get the adaptation program on the table of the COP17, so that at least one of the things that we agree upon there must be to bring a balance between mitigation and adaptation. Why adaptation is because within the agricultural sector, there is a need for our farmers, small and commercial farmers, to actually adapt. I'm glad to say also that our ministers of agriculture actually had a meeting, and energy ministers. They had their sessions on their own, thinking about and talking about what actions they have to take. There is a clear program now. What's left is for us to actually go ahead and implement those programs like yesterday, and getting capacity, getting help, getting technological transfer, and getting funds that are necessary. And this is what we are going to be dialoguing about at COP17.
But before COP, by the time we get to COP, are you comfortable that Africa has, since the Panama meeting just recently, has formulated and will go through with a clear position on Kyoto, on creating again an extension to Kyoto as some of the more immediate targets to achieve?
Yes, as we were formulating the position towards COP17, that's now starting from just as we left Cancun last year, the African group has actually been working together. In February, we met at UNEP, at the UNEP meeting, on the sidelines of the UNEP meeting, as ministers and negotiators, starting to really have a dialogue. Already there's been 3 meetings of negotiators preparing for the various sessions of negotiations that have taken place. There have been 2 meetings, that one and the recent one that has taken place, of the African ministers. Why did we need those 2 meetings? Because we really needed to find one another. And I must say that throughout this whole year, the discussions that we held have actually proven that just on one thing, we have been very unanimous right from the onset. That's the need for us to actually ensure that the second commitment period of Kyoto Protocol is agreed upon here in Durban. Why is it so? Because the world will not have another opportunity to have a discussion on second commitment period. It expires next year in December. But linked to that is also the issues under the LCA, the convention. Those who actually work with their commitments under the convention, those 2 areas of work that we are doing, we need to actually ensure that the work that we do under Kyoto, if we get the second commitment period, it's got to actually bring a balance between the KP people and the people who are committed under the KP, as well as those who are under the convention, so that put together we can make a difference, a bigger difference indeed. We believe that we've got to move, as opposed to the 17% of the convention now and the small percentage that's under.
Minister, you're talking about a balance occurring on a global level. Do you think that the US is going to sign up to the Kyoto Protocol if it is going to go in its next round? And do you think that it should? And what is the role then of emerging markets in terms of getting an example from the developed nations?
Our first prize, let me start at the end. Our first prize is to get everybody at least having some form of rules. That's what we want, under this very much envisaged legally binding outcome. That's what we want, because we want those rules. Kyoto Protocol has got rules. Why we need the second commitment period is because we need those good rules. There are some weaknesses under the Kyoto Protocol, but we need those rules. And the architecture, if we carry the architecture along and at least begin to work on some form of legal form, we believe that at least the US has not stayed out of the discussions. That's what's good about it. They've always been engaging, and that's some kind of engagement that they want to get in, to say that let's get the legal form and clarify ourselves even before we can get to the commitment. Mindful of that fact, we're saying if parties can't get into the second commitment period, we need some form of a political agreement that will take us even up to the transition period. That's a fallback position. Obviously, our negotiators will talk to that in much more detail. But there are two options, and there are maybe not two, 3, 4 available options, which we believe that the US may have to listen. They will not sign up this year, we know. They may not sign up next year, but as we proceed, what's important is to get actions.
Does this frustrate you at all, though, Minister, when you see the US,
yes.
the largest economy in the world,
yes.
not signing up to something that actually threatens the global economy, never mind the environment?
No, I must say it does.
Yes.
It does disappoint, because I think we need countries that are big to actually provide leadership and act.
Yeah, I apologize. But what I wanted to just add to Eleni's question was, I mean, Japan is sending out signals now that it's not even interested in Kyoto.
Yes.
And yet the whole convention, the protocol carries the name of a city in Japan where it all started.
We're very disappointed about Japan being potential ship jumpers. But we're also saying at the same time, as we listen to them, they're saying, will it be important for the EU, by the way, saying the same?
Yes.
If we are attracted into, or carry on with the Kyoto Protocol, what's in it for us? What's new? Because we're not really making a difference. So let's get more role players in this new arrangement, or the arrangement where we have rules that are tighter, not under the LCA, that are tighter like those that are under Kyoto Protocol, and actually act within the rules. So it is for that reason that I'm saying that there is some creativity that we're beginning to hear coming out. If our first prize is second commitment period, but they're saying, Japan is saying, even if we get in, we can't make a difference being just a few Kyoto Protocol signatories. And if we can't make a difference being the few, why do we leave other people behind? And this is where creativity comes in.
Minister, what would you say is the make or break theme for COP17? Is there anything you've got your finger on?
Yes, KP. I've got 5 issues that we would like to see coming out of it. Operationalization of a Cancun decision. All of them, you know, there's fund, green fund included in there, adaptation framework, adaptation committee, capacity, transfer of technology, and the RED Plus. Operationalize them when we get to there. Bring forth the issue of the adaptation, in line with mitigation so that there's balance. Thirdly, let's get the KP, second commitment period. Fourthly, more importantly for us as Africa, the Green Climate Fund. And finally, let's really say something about what is it that we do about the remaining aspects of our Bali roadmap. For instance, issues of aviation, we can look at those. It's a low-lying fruit. Issues of equity, issues of the agriculture, for instance. Yes, we want to have adaptation now embodying agriculture much more, especially for us as the African continent.
Thank you so very much. We have to leave it there. Great to have you on the program, Minister.
Thank you very
so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
On that note, we've come to the end of this week's edition of Climate Change Perspectives. A very big thank you to our guest, South African Minister for Water and Environmental Affairs, Edna Molewa. And of course, a big thank you to my guest host, who is Daniel Kinnear from the Africa Strategy Group. From me, Eleni Giokos, it's goodbye.